Well, welcome back to the Happy Cynics, everybody. We're going to do 2 episodes here. The first one is understanding reactionaries. What makes them tick? What creates reactionaries? And then next episode, we will go the opposite direction and what creates revolutionaries. All right, so let's start with the reactionaries. Isaac, what do you think here? Are they just reacting against something for different reasons, or how do you want to kick this off?
Well, I think this is a term that could use some defining, because I think people who aren't like really engaged in political discourse probably haven't heard the term reactionary before.
Okay.
But a reactionary is like a political stance that looks to the past,
Right.
towards like former hierarchies and structures of society,
Right.
and is reacting against progress to basically like go back to the way things used to be.
Right.
So
Right.
one of the things that I would like classify as reactionary is the philosophy of Jordan Peterson,
Okay.
because he looks at lobsters and says, look, hierarchical societies are inherent in nature and therefore should be inherent in human structures too. And what he's trying to make the case for is going back to a more hierarchical style
Right.
society, which is, it's more than just like the conservative stance of like, oh, well, we need to go back to like the 50s traditions. It's like, we need to go all the way back to monarchical dictatorships, that sort of thing. So fascism and Nazism are inherently reactionary.
Okay. So, right off the bat, let me ask you, how much of this do you think is driven ideologically in general? So how is this tied into Trumpism?
Yes,
because
Trump is reactionary.
Yes. So are the reactionaries today, is reactionism? I'm not sure how you say, but being reactionary, is that kind of a ripple effect of Trumpism, or is Trumpism a symptom of people being reactionary?
I think there's always been a reactionary movement.
Right.
And reactionary movements tend to be populist.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I've seen advocated for is calling the MAGA movement within republicanism not the far right or the alt-right, but rather the reactionary right.
Okay.
Because it's not tied, you brought up ideology, it's not tied to ideology. It's not tied to policy. It is emotional and tied to identity. It is identity politics, but from the right.
Okay. All right. So that's one aspect of it. So let's talk about that. So identity. So, or am I I don't want to get you off your game here.
No, this is a great place to start, I think, because I think the reactionary right in America is these like hillbilly, not to be like derogatory in any of these terms, but like hillbilly, Rust Belt, small town, generally white people, almost exclusively white people, because one of the things that they want to go back to is a white dominated society.
Right.
So this coincides with like, I would call them lost causers, but like Confederate flag flying, the South will rise again, Dixie loving people. That's a reactionary movement to go back to pre-Civil War times. Right.
So what is it? Okay. Is it just, okay. So to what extent is this bigotry, or is this, a matter of them being displaced? Because I remember the rioters, in Virginia when you had that thing, and then that dude ran his car into the crowd.
Oh yeah, the Unite the Right rally.
That. Was
that South Carolina? I think.
Well, there was one there, and then
Charleston, I think.
yeah, but there was that one in Virginia too, where they were like chanting, "Jews shall not replace us. Jews shall not replace
Oh,
us."
yeah, right.
So I think there is, okay, so this is more than just, I think it's more than just bigotry. I mean, this is more than just, well, we don't like these people, they're different, and so they don't want to speak English. Okay, because, we get a lot of those kind of comments. Well, if they're going to live here, they got to learn English, and,
Having like looked into some of the content and the things that are produced from this community where they talk about their ideology and why they are the way they are, they don't see themselves as bigots.
Right.
What they see is that our European Western white culture, they always tie it to race. That's another like thing about them. They always tie it to race because to them it's a loss of ethnicity that they perceive, that the European ethnicity on the North American continent is somehow dying. And that perception is what I think drives this sort of reaction.
I'd like to relate this to, just for a moment, to the philosopher Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer was kind of a cynic of his own day and age, and some say he just was you could say he was an outright misanthrope. I don't mean to take that kind of a position, but here's a quote. For example, he says, "The cheapest sort of pride is national pride. For if a man is proud of his own nation, it argues that he has no qualities of his own of which he can be proud. Otherwise, he would not have recourse to those which he shares with so many millions of his fellow men. The man who is endowed with important personal qualities will be only too ready to see clearly in what respects his own nation falls short, since their feelings will be constantly before his eyes. But every miserable fool who has nothing at all of which he can be proud adopts, as a last resource, pride in the nation to which he belongs. He is ready and glad to defend all its faults and follies tooth and nail, thus reimbursing himself for his own inferiority."
Yeah, definitely. I can see how that plays in, especially when I think liberals a lot of times ask themselves, why is it that poor people tend to elect reactionary politicians?
Right. Because it's just like people living vicariously through sports teams or whatever, okay, or politics. It just kind of gives you some kind of default importance. I think that when the more multicultural a society becomes, and the more pluralistic it becomes, not just religiously, but in terms of people having different ideas and people having learned to be tolerant of different opinions, the people who aren't the best or most confident in their own ideas or their own contributions, it's almost, maybe this will get me in trouble. I kind of feel sorry when I go out in public and I see like adults my age that are still wearing like sports player jerseys with the athlete's name on the back. And I think that I remember, when I was in my teens and early 20s, that, that was pretty cool. It's like made you feel kind of cool because you're following this great athlete or whatever. But as I got older, and I'm not knocking people being fans and displaying, show their support for an athlete, and maybe that's all it is.
I've been in your house. I've seen your jersey on the wall.
Hey, listen, I inherited that. We inherited that from my father-in-law. Okay, so I have great respect he's talking about our replica jersey of Franco Harris when he made the Immaculate Reception in the 72.
It's a cool jersey.
Yes, it really is. And I really like it. But,
I'm not knocking you for having a cool jersey. I'm just
listen,
saying, like he does get the whole sports fans thing.
Well, yes. But I would probably not be inclined to wear a Franco Harris jersey out in public. Like that's kind of how I want people to notice me. I'd rather be noticed. I mean, to me, like the Schopenhauer quote, I'm not saying this is the way people ought to be, but who are the people that jump on the bandwagons? The people that jump on bandwagons are the ones who don't stand out by themselves. I'm sorry, but that's just, I mean, I'm apologizing to you listeners who I know that may sound offensive, but I don't, you see this in the dynamics. So people that want to go back to, people want to embrace something different. They want to jump on some sort of a bandwagon. And even this idea of reactionary, I don't think it's so much that everybody thinks, oh, life was so much better back then. If we could just recreate the 1930s or the 20s or the 1950s or the 1800s or whatever, or the reign of Napoleon or something like that. I'm not sure it's really that. I think what people long for is this kind of era where group identity was a big thing. So you just, you feel important. You put your little sticker on your vehicle or bumper of your car. You belong to this group. You belong to that group. And, whether that's the Shrine or the NRA or whatever it may be, even putting a fish on, to show, it just all this kind of group identity. It's still a lot of tribalism. And I think there are people who are willing to give up personal freedom to go back to a time where by just being a sheep or follower of some group somehow gives you some sort of special status.
Yeah, I think to go back to Schopenhauer, I don't have a good quote for this, but I know he talks about that people want to be desired. People want to feel important.
Right.
People want the desire of the other, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of reactionary politics are these people who feel like they are disgusting or, what's the word I'm looking for? Like repugnant. That they can't be desired, that they are the antithesis of like woke culture that controls everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because they always see that like the liberals are always in control of everything, and the liberals want to destroy, my culture, my white European culture.
Right.
I think that perception of the self as something that is not desired, can't be desired, is what sort of is the psychological background for a lot of the reactionary politics, because when you can tie yourself to a politician who's owning the libs, you get to participate in that
the victory.
Pleasure at the expense of the other, right?
Yes.
You get to experience that. Well, I'm owning the libs too because I voted for this guy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. And that's part of the problem. We have too many people whose personal self-esteem is invested in other people's lives instead of their own lives. It's like if my sports team wins, then it's just like whenever whatever team wins a championship, somehow people in that city gives them feelings of superiority. And it's like, really, how many people on the team actually even came or grew up in this city to begin with? It's like, really? Is that, I understand about being excited and winning and all, winning and all of that, but to take it to that kind of level where it somehow is interwoven and becomes like this deeply personal thing, that's where it really becomes is sad on one hand, but also kind of dangerous on the other hand. Because honestly, when we talk about fascism, okay, that's really what the appeal of people like Hitler and Mussolini brought to the table, and how they gained their following.
Yeah, it's telling, I think, that these sorts of ideologies, and they're not true ideologies because they have no like content to them. They can be anything as long as it's a reaction against progress.
Right.
There's no policy work being done by the politicians who are reactionary, right? That's why the Republican Party can receive a bill that shuts the border down and does everything they've been saying they want to do, and they shoot it down, right? Because it's not about policy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's what politics is devolved into, because the success is not based on the success of the country. It's the success of my group, my party.
Exactly. And I think it's so like Germany was ripe, and Italy were ripe for this fascist takeover because they had just lost World War I, right? They were losers.
Right.
They perceived themselves as losers. Their economic situation was terrible.
Well, they
had no hope for anything.
Right. They took the brunt and the blame for World War I. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, and rightly or not, I think World War I was kind of wrong on all sides, right? Looking back on history. But these people took the blame for it. And so I think what you're seeing in our country is a lot of people whose economic situation hasn't improved since 2008 when it crashed. It comes out of the Rust Belt where industry has not been present for 50 years. And all these towns are decaying. There's nothing to be proud of about your hometown anymore.
Right.
That is the roots of, I think, the MAGA movement.
Oh, absolutely.
That this culture is in crisis, and it's gonna pick an enemy to blame that all on.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. Okay. So that's another element. So there's this motivation. And then the rationale. So the rationale is you oversimplify the complex problems by just some kind of easy fix-it solution. And ironically, that ends up getting embraced at both ends of the political spectrum.
Yep.
And so that gives each side that much more confidence that their solution is the right one, because it's so obvious how shallow and inadequate the other side's views are.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, like, reactionary politics are not exclusively on the right.
Right.
So
right.
The left-wing reactionaries look a lot more like Stalin did nothing wrong. They praise China for how they treat their citizens. In left-wing circles, they're called tankies, right? Because they are, the tanks need to roll in and oust all these corrupt, billionaires. And if we can just, eat the rich, then all of our problems will be solved. And we need a violent revolution and install our guy in office. And that sort of like authoritarian left-wing is the same reactionary stuff on the right.
Yes. No, I agree. So before moving into the
not that they're moral equivalents, though. No, I don't want to
No, that's a good caveat to make. Okay, but before moving into what's the ideology or say the rationale behind being reactionary, let's continue to probe a little bit here, the motivation again. So we've named kind of group identity, personal importance, but I think another thing that you just brought up is that's another thing. So it's not just that people everybody wants to distinguish themselves from other people. I think that, well, society has become, in the West, in the United States anyway, increasingly individualistic. We've talked about this, I don't know in how many different respects. So even you think about the entertainment industry. I mean, you can pretty much put together your own customized package of music that you like to listen to. Whereas in the day, the only people that could afford to do that were people that had a lot of money to spend on buying all the albums that they wanted to listen to or whatever. Right. It wasn't affordable for the average person. But now, people have, with the financial shifts that have taken place since, the problem was we had financial hardships that came in the 70s, and then Carter got scapegoated for these and brought in Reagan. And then Reagan basically empowered the rich to basically take over the economy. And now people are working harder for less and less money. And we have these generations that are coming up that basically have less to start life with than their parents did, which is, we're going backward.
Fertile soil for reactionary politics. Yeah.
Because, that's a part of it. Like, even if somebody, we're already moving in a way where everybody's got these individualized interests. So group dynamics are getting dissolved. So, for example, years ago, let's say some blue collar guy who works an 8 to 5 job, belongs to the union. Okay. Might join a bowling team. Okay. And so that's recreational, but it's also like a type of group identity, or it might belong to, say, the lodge or another civic group or something like that, or go to church, be a part of a church. But now everything's becoming more and more individualistic. Everybody is getting used to having exactly what they want. So I remember seeing all this when I was your age, and we started having this like, well, we don't want to change the music for the young people, because we only want to come to church if the music's what we want to listen to. And so little by little, there was less of this give and take between younger and older generations, and things just kind of diffused out. So now there aren't that many bowling leagues anymore, and there aren't that many, as many people supporting like these civic groups as there once was. I just read an article here today or yesterday that Boy Scouts are they were on the verge of bankruptcy for having to pay out claims for sexual abuse complaints that have been lodged in the past so many years. And so they are now going to, instead of calling it Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, I think it's just going to be like Scouting America or something. I can't remember what it's going to be called, but they're trying to recast it. And what I noted was that they said that there are now like less than a million kids participating in scouting, as opposed to, say, 1972, 50 years ago, when it was at its peak. There were like 7 million youth participating in scouting programs. And, that was another thing. Like, there, like everybody, like there were always like kids in every class that belonged to scouting. It was like the thing to do. And, you made friends, you were scouting or 4-H or something like that. But see, all of this kind of traditional, interaction and people like having a sense of belonging and identity and all that, that's been diffused. At least people still had the option that they could distinguish themselves by their possessions. So, some people would let their houses go so they could buy a nicer vehicle. So when they drive around town, they have a fancy vehicle to show that I can afford to drive this vehicle. Or there were some of us like me, my thing was wearing nice clothes. I wanted to be well dressed when I went somewhere. And it was just not that I wore expensive stuff, but that was kind of my identity thing. Okay. And I think everybody's looking for this, but now we get to the point where everybody buys cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And people don't have the disposable income, for some of these things. We basically are dumping so much money into entertainment that people aren't investing in some of these other ways that people used to invest in order to build self-esteem, by social and group dynamics and things like that. So where are they left? The internet. And you find and you get people screaming and yelling and scapegoating somebody else. It just,
it's interesting thinking about internet content, because a lot of famous internet creators, their bread and butter is not like putting a video out and entertaining an audience. It's fostering a community around their persona.
Right. And to me, it's a very telling thing because, okay, so for example, I'm teaching an online version of my world religions course. Okay. And I worked all last summer in designing it. Well, now the way the standards are in higher education, there's a certain number of interactive activities that are expected to be a part of an online course, because they say we want to create a community amongst the students. Like, we don't want a collection of individuals just, doing the readings and watching the videos and then turning in assignments independently. We want this kind of a group, and, so everybody's got to do this introductory video, introducing yourself. And so they're trying to build this. And I think that's great, but I'm just saying, to me, it's telling that is now like a critical part of pretty much anything you do, because a lot of people are lacking a sense of community or group identity. I mean, how many people even today don't even know who their neighbors are, and don't even speak to their neighbors, even if they see them out? People move around a lot. I mean, I remember as a kid growing up, who lived in every single house, all the way up the street. And you had met these people, you knew what children they had, and you went to school together, and everybody kind of knew each other. But now things have become so transient in so many different ways.
There's a myriad of studies showing that Americans are more isolated now than they've ever been.
Absolutely.
And we talked about that. Part of it is our infrastructure. We can go that far back.
Yes.
Our constructed environment is meant to be isolating.
Mm-hmm.
But to tie back to the reactionary thing, I think we need to sort of point out some of the things that in American politics are suddenly normal that would have not been normal 10 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
So Indiana, the state I live in, just had its Republican primary.
Right.
And our candidate for governor from the Republican Party is Mike Braun, who famously has said that he thinks legalizing interracial marriage at the federal level was a mistake. And like, is serious. Like, this was recent. This wasn't like he said this 20 years ago.
So does he make this claim? What's his basis for this claim?
His whole point was,
argument?
No, his point is that it should be up
crap?
to the states to decide if they want interracial marriage.
Oh, I see. So we're going to try to recreate and expand the old Confederacy.
It's a reactionary thing to go back to the Confederacy.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling from a normal political like mindset that somebody could say that and still win a primary. That this is where the Republican Party is now. And then you have Trump saying things like, I'm going to be a dictator, or I'm going to be the king. And these are the people who claim that like they are upholding American values. When that's obviously like the thing we revolted against in the founding of our country in the first place.
Yes. Yes.
So you have to decode some of this stuff to understand it, though, that when they say American culture and they're defending America and what Americans are, they mean white and they mean European ancestry. And part of that is monarchy.
Yes. Yes. So what is it that's appealing about the monarchy?
I think it is entirely down to being able to project yourself onto your political head of state. The glory of the king is the glory of the people.
I honestly think that we've got a lot of people who they are so wrapped up in preserving their cultural importance, what they perceive it ought to be. I mean, I think a lot of what we have is we were here first. How dare you take it over? Although, we did the same thing to the Native Americans. And then, I mean, this has been going on in this country. You bring all these immigrants in. We've had waves of immigrants over time. And every time all these groups end up bringing their influence, when it's all said and done, it all kind of evens out and we just end up with like a wider variety of foods.
Right. Yeah.
Because even like the clothes, I mean, you don't see people walking around wearing lederhosen or dancing around in loincloths. I mean, everybody,
unfortunately,
but everybody, I mean, it's only the food is really, and not even the music. I mean, I guess you could go up to Wisconsin or someplace and hear some polka.
I was literally about to say, I don't hear very much polka around here.
Because I'm actually a pretty good polka fan. I used to dance to polka albums at both of my grandparents' houses. So when I discovered polka as a little
only
kid.
Cameras were, there.
Well, there's home movies of this. There's home movies.
Oh man,
of me as like a little 4-year-old choreographing songs and stuff, dancing to polka music.
All right, folks. If you donate to our fundraiser, we'll release these videos on the internet.
I have to get them from my dad. They're in his attic somewhere. But most of this is all settled out. I mean, really, were people that afraid of losing their culture? See, and this is where well, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I really do think that it is like when you start dealing with sexuality issues, that is where this is still, as far as I'm concerned, this is all still a ripple effect, still from the 1960s. And I don't think all this is going to settle down until pretty much anybody who was old enough to remember the 1960s and maybe even the 70s have all of us have died off, and you're left with people who were never even alive during the 60s and 70s.
Well, yeah, but a lot of reactionaries are younger. That they've inherited that mindset of purposelessness that drives them to that.
You're right. I'm ignoring that, I guess.
The sexuality issue, I think, is interesting because I think it's only a problem because it threatens what they see as a natural hierarchy between the genders.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, that's a good question. Boy, I wonder, I have to do a little digging and research. I wonder if there's any social science research that shows any correlation between, say, sexism and being opposed to, like, in other words, is the reaction against LGBTQ rights just another form of sexism, or say gender? In other words, like they want traditional roles because I don't understand. I'm not even sure. Are women statistically more likely to accept LGBTQ people than males?
Women are more statistically likely to be on the left than men.
That's what I thought too. Yeah, so I think there's probably, like, in other words, some of this reaction against gender equality. That's what I want to say. We just have different forms of gender inequality. But this idea of gender equality, I think that is kind of like the nail in the coffin for old-fashioned machismo and that sort of thing. Or at least I think they're afraid of that. But I don't know that necessarily has to be a thing. I think even if we have, can accept people, like, for example, I remember that there was resistance, a lot of resistance, even whenever I was a kid, to, say, male nurses, or to, say, female construction workers. Things like this, because they're supposed to be it was all gender role stuff. Like women were supposed to be caregivers, men were supposed to do manual labor and run things. So, there was a lot of bias that had to be overcome, and eventually that was overcome. But that still doesn't take away from, say, anybody, like, for example, does it really, whenever, let's say whenever 99% or 100% of all doctors were male, by having female doctors, did that really somehow cheapen being the achievement of being a doctor for the males? I don't think it did at all. It's obvious. I mean, if let's just say some man prides himself as being physically strong and doing a lot of tough work, so work in construction or, some other kind of manual labor. Well, just because you have females who are serving certain roles in those businesses, does that somehow take away from the males' pride in doing those jobs? I don't think so. I mean, see, and this is kind of the thing. I think this is all part of the whole reactionary mindset is that people are afraid that, like, they want this feeling of importance by default, not by their own competence.
Right. Yeah, I think you're exactly right.
And so
it's an entitled mindset. And
yes. I mean, that is the one thing, like, that strikes me about this whole movement. There's like a sense of entitlement. And that's why they don't even care about democracy.
Right.
And they're willing to throw democracy out because it's not about majority rule or any kind of principles. It's about me being entitled because I was here first and the way it used to be. So, I used to be able to get in front of the line all the time. So I should still be able to do that.
Yeah. It's not about political savvy or the strength of one's ideas.
Right.
It's about identity. It always comes back to that I deserve to hold the dominant position in society. And I think this is why it always comes back to race for a lot of these people, because I'm white and being white makes me better.
Yeah. Well, that's one of them. I think being male, heterosexual male makes me better. It's just like, even before, let's say, even apart from sexuality, like I was saying, like, there was a day where like young men were kind of afraid, like they weren't encouraged to participate in theater and things like that, Yeah. So this is why, why do we have, I think it's probably, I don't know. I'd have to check into this, but historically, why did, say, ballet and figure skating and things like that attract gay men more so than heterosexual men? And it was because of all this stereotyping of what it means to be a man, so men, they don't do that stuff. We go out and, bang each other around like playing football or, whatever. So it's more rugged. It's more dangerous. It's not supposed to be stylistic, and same thing with women, women, they're supposed to just play, tennis and things where they can still wear dresses and look cute.
Right.
Now, okay, lest I start sounding a little, okay, here's the part of, say, liberalism. Okay. A lot of liberals will recognize that, but then they want to act like, okay, because we want to open up opportunities for people regardless of gender. Mm-hmm. Okay. That somehow our other instincts, as far as, like, for example, we're not going to get to a point where, men are going to, like, if men are going to watch women's sports, they're going to enjoy watching women's sports when women are wearing eye-appealing, sexy outfits. I don't, and that's just human nature. I'm not saying that's okay or not okay or whatever, but at least, okay, so like some of these athletes, they realize that. You just got to make sure you don't allow yourself to be defined by that.
Right. Well, and there's two interesting things that are going on in culture right now that sort of tie into this, which is the rise of popularity of women's basketball.
Yes.
Because of, I forget her name, but she's from Indiana.
Caitlin Clark?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's, because of her athletic prowess,
mm-hmm.
people are, oh, this is exciting to watch now.
Yes.
Whereas before, just being completely honest, women's basketball was boring because nothing ever happened.
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
The other thing that happened recently was there was a big controversy in like gamer circles about this game called Stellar Blade.
Okay.
People who are not part of like gaming news channels are not going to know about this, but it's a game where the protagonist is a female, basically sex icon.
Oh, okay.
Big boobs, big butt, and she, kicks butt with a big sword.
Okay.
It's a purely like eye candy sort
Kind
of
of like
game.
Xena,
It's
the
not
warrior princess or something.
exactly same vibe.
Okay. All right. Got it.
And the studio advertised this game using images of these outfits that you could get in the game. This is all like kind of cringy stuff to me, but this is what the discourse is right now. When they released the game, they had to edit those outfits to make them less revealing.
Okay.
And people were upset about this because this was censorship from their studio. That like the developers of the game wanted to release this stupid sexy game. And they were told by the studio to censor it because it was too provocative.
A sword fight in lingerie, like the lingerie football.
Basically, essentially that.
The lingerie football league, like Vince McMahon tried to do. Have you ever seen that?
I've never seen that, but that sounds like something.
You have to look it up on
YouTube.
It's really something. I'll say that.
Well, so people were upset on both the right and the left about this censorship because why was it a problem for some people to want this product?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. It's not like this is a real person that they're objectifying.
Right,
like,
right.
Who cares? So there's a perception, though, that I think from reactionaries, and I think there's a significant overlap between reactionaries and the incel community. I don't know if you're familiar with the incel community.
The term sounds familiar, but I'm
so it stands for involuntarily celibate.
Oh, okay.
It's people who like can't get a girlfriend, basically, and they turn against women as a whole.
Okay.
As part of belonging to this community, that women just hate men. Feminism has poisoned women. Nobody, I deserve to have a woman just because I'm a man who wants one.
So they become misogynists, huh?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think there's something to be said about like those impulses of like censorship from the liberal side, right? That we don't want to be objectifying women in our game, even that's what the whole point of the game was. And like, we're going to make people feel bad for wanting to play a game where there's an attractive woman on screen. There's no nudity in this game either. It's just like, skimpy outfits.
So it's not like the Sims XXX version or something like that.
No. And like, part of it is like, I thought we lived in a sex positive society, liberals. Like,
yeah.
I thought, so I think liberals don't understand the reactionary mindset.
No, and that's why even some of the right wing, for example, not saying that I agree with this, but I know that like Rush Limbaugh used to claim that feminism was developed by women who weren't confident about their looks. I'll say it in a nicer way than he used to.
Yeah, that's still, wow.
But yeah, I mean, but
yikes.
You get. So in other words, if a woman is attractive, then she doesn't need to have a movement to gain that attention and respect or whatever. I think that is a gross oversimplification. But a lot of people, I don't want to get into, it's kind of like, okay, does playing a violent video game, does that breed violence or not? I think the evidence kind of goes against it. So it's just like, so if you have something like that, and is that kind of fostering the objectification of women or not? Are we just giving, these?
Well, and I think a lot of like the liberal tactic is a lot of virtue signaling. So we're not going to say certain words. We're not going to behave certain ways. And we're going to make people who do those things feel outcast. I think that ends up sowing the seeds for pushing people further down the rabbit hole of the right-wing reactionary crazy stuff.
Yes.
And then the liberal politicians are like, well, we're going to try to work across the aisle and, we're going to try and work with Republicans. And at this point, I mean, maybe like John McCain era Republicans, that was possible.
Right.
But in this day and age, the Republican Party isn't policy minded.
No.
Right? And part of the reason for that is that the reactionaries who now control that party saw that conservatism was basically nothing more than economic policy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? That was the downfall of the McCain era.
Right.
This is all about economics and securing the rights of the rich. And they don't care about that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, and that's another aspect, I think, of what creates a reactionary. The one thing we haven't brought up is how extreme begets extreme. And I think there's some of that on both sides. So anytime, I'm not saying that liberals are, idealistic liberals are responsible for creating the reactionaries. But in some cases, I think that does tend to foster it.
Or inflame it when it already exists. That's what I would say.
Yes. Yes. I think it definitely fans the flame. It's like when you hear some kind of oversimplification on one side, or let's just say, again, some type of bigotry or prejudice. I mean, that can come from different directions. I don't think that anything we've said here has inherently been derogatory, say, against, say, rural America or blue collar work or anything like that. But you can see where it can become very easy to characterize it that way. And then all this does is anger and encourage people to take their rhetoric to more of an extreme too.
Yeah, and part of that is the perception that rural blue collar America is being treated, their perception is that they're being treated like they're stupid because they don't have access to all the cultural things that, the urbanite liberals do.
Right. Yeah, so we're not going to try to unpack the different types of reactionary thought that are out there because there's a number of them. But the dynamics, the psychological, social dynamics, I think are like these common threads, and that's what we've been trying to identify. I think, we kind of alluded to this a little bit, but there is a sense where some people, they want to recreate a period in their lives when they believed that, like let's put it this way. Let's say they felt better about themselves for whatever reason. And they think that the key to feeling better about themselves is to try to get society to return back to those ways of thinking and try to recreate those things again. And it's kind of sad because I think a lot of people, you can temporarily do that, but it ends up falling apart. I mean, it's not like Germany is still crawling with Nazi supporters.
Right.
Germany is a lot different today because of, and truthfully, these are how some of these things run their course. I hope that we don't have to go to that sense or extreme. But here's the thing. The people in Germany who thought like Hitler, they eventually mostly died off. There are still some out there. There are always going to be people out there embracing different ideas, but some kind of a mass psychosis of everybody buying into this rhetoric that if we can just do this or do that or return back to the good old days or whatever, or restructure everything and create this utopia. Those are like doomed to failure because it's obvious that it's like they say the ship has already sailed. It's not going to come back to the port. I mean, go ahead.
I think one of the things that you don't hear when you listen to these reactionaries talk about what they believe, they never talk about morality,
right? Or
what is the right thing to do. How do you treat people? They never talk about that. It's always, it's victim mindset and mixed with like an identity crisis, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not like they project this vision for the future of a utopia where, white culture can exist and, the people who aren't part of our culture, they can have their own place.
Yeah.
They can, I don't want to be part of that culture. I want my own culture. They never talk about what it would take to get to that point.
Well, okay. So, even some of the stuff we looked at and listened to, there are people that mention like, okay, well, the Enlightenment, because even like I've mentioned this before, like I've even read Catholic thinkers who still are crying about the Enlightenment, like that somehow destroyed Western society.
There's a trend amongst like open reactionaries to critique the Enlightenment.
Oh, absolutely. And the Enlightenment and modernism, it really is like, I mean, I hate to say this, but in my mind, these are the people that still want a kind of infantile world where everything's already defined for them. And just because a lot of people don't yet have the skill set to make these kind of decisions and learn these lessons doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to go through the growing pains of learning to do this. But somehow, I've used this illustration before, but I remember whenever we find, like when society in the United States started loosening divorce laws, okay, to, just simply allow couples that the relationship wasn't working anymore to just allow them to get a divorce without, having to prove that somehow they're being hospitalized or, cheated on all the time or something like that. But when they loosened the divorce laws, the divorce rate went really high for at least a decade. And so then a bunch of the reactionaries were the people say, see, now, so we need to go back to in other words, they'd rather be in a controlled environment, treat us like children, because they're basically saying we don't trust ourselves and we don't trust our fellow citizens. Like even these people that bemoan this, they're like, oh, we have the freedom to think and kind of consider what's right and what's wrong. It's like, oh no, there's no morality anymore. And no, everybody's got this despair.
Well, and it's telling that like living in a primarily Republican state, small government republicanism is dead here.
Yeah.
They want to regulate every little thing you do.
Yes. Because you have people who assume that because they have trouble navigating the decisions of life without these props and forms and training wheels, it's like they want to ride. They used to have this ride at Kennywood amusement park in Pittsburgh.
I love Kennywood.
Yeah, I figured you'd been there because since you have family there in Pittsburgh.
Okay. That was the first amusement park I ever went to.
Okay, so you know the ride I'm talking about called the Pennsylvania Turnpike. So they have these little cars, and and it's one of the few where there's actually room
you can
to
steer a little bit.
You can steer a little bit, but it's kind of like putting the bumper rails
on a bowling
alley. Yes. All right. Yeah. So there are these people that want the bumper rails, and so the bumper rails are going to keep, I've got freedom to, so as long as I'm living within these rules and these guidelines, then I know I'm going to be okay. That's fine if you're one of those people who, living within, it's like I say, training wheels on a bicycle. Well, training wheels on a bicycle will do a lot to keep you from upsetting and wrecking, but it also cuts down what you can do in riding a bicycle too. There's a lot of things you can't do as long as you're riding with training wheels. But do people want to go through the process of learning how to balance the bike and how to ride it without the training wheels? And often, how many people learn to ride a bike without spilling and wrecking at least one time? This is part of our problem. Okay, so I just saw, I was watching The Daily Show, and it was hosted by Jordan Klepper the other night, and I can't remember the name of the guy. He wrote a book. Was he from NYU? But he was talking about how since the advent of smartphones, that young people, like, they've been robbed of what he calls a human childhood. He's talking about how, like, whenever people, and he looks like he's around my age. He's, we're definitely Gen Xers. And he was saying about how basically we got to this point where we just insulate kids and keep them from ever getting harmed. And then they don't learn how to navigate danger in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, millennials call those iPad kids.
Ah, okay. All right. So it's the same kind of thing. There has to be a certain amount of risk. And once you go through the risk and you learn how to navigate this, I would venture to say that most people who have a marriage today have a better quality relationship in their marriage than people did 50, 60 years ago, who basically kept their marriages together because they had to, or because they had to live according to certain stereotypical roles. This is what the husband does. This is what the wife does.
Data is there to back up that take, that marriages today that exist, the marriages that there are healthier and happier than they were pre no-fault divorce.
But it takes more work, but the work is worth it because you end up with a more rewarding, fulfilling relationship.
Yeah. Those who argue against the no-fault divorce stuff tend to forget that the people who get divorces don't do it for no reason.
Yes. There's always a reason. It just, the no fault is really like, it doesn't have to be abuse or cheating.
And you don't have to air your dirty laundry in court to get this done.
Right. You don't have to get up there and besmirch your spouse in order to get a divorce. But it takes a learning curve. We're going through, again, some of this, but just because there's a bigger group of people who now feel insecure without these guidelines to guide them, the answer is not going back to, let's all kind of go back to a time where we all kind of thought in infantile terms. And
the Dark Ages.
Yeah, people told us what to do. It's just kind of silly and ridiculous. And you look at, even with the decline of religion in this country, one of the reasons I think it's declining as quickly as it is, Christianity especially, is because the people that are persistent in Christianity are trying to return back to earlier times where there wasn't freedom of thought. It's almost like they're even Protestants are trying to undo the Reformation and have these kind of litmus tests of whether you're really Orthodox or not.
Yeah, well, and I think maturity of belief is becoming less welcome in the church.
Yes.
That having a nuance in your belief, and I've experienced this personally, changing what you believe about something and having a little bit of room for nuance or tension or unknowing or doubt of any kind
Right.
can and does make you anathema to certain people.
Right. And again, it's because you have a certain number of people who want their self-esteem, their value, their feeling of importance to somehow be theirs by default.
Right.
And
the room for difference or ambiguity is a threat to that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think to bring back just to politics here.
Okay.
It's a troubling sign that half of our government is now basically in the hands of reactionaries.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is the fault of, it's not anyone's fault, but it is a product of the Obama presidency. Because I think if Obama had addressed some of these people without, he kind of had an air of
condescension.
Better than,
yes.
That is the problem. I think that is what birthed the Trump movement, is that the liberals under Obama had a little bit of, high on their own horse a little bit.
That and the liberal protection of the Clintons. Because the Clintons,
and then the failure of Obama to follow through on any of his promises with health care or...
No, I what I mean is, so there's both, So Obama, he didn't come through whenever they had control of both houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives, for, I think it was a 2-year period. They just kind of blew the whole thing. They didn't do anything. And that was a squandered opportunity. And then the fact that Obama would react to criticism by basically, he came across as condescending. I don't know if
the high road every time.
Yeah, I don't know if that was his intention or whatever. It doesn't really matter.
There's a reason that Key and Peele skit where you have Obama's anger translator is so funny and relatable. Have you ever seen this?
No.
So it's Key and Peele, and one of them is playing Obama, and one of them is playing Obama's anger translator. It's like Obama will say something, I really disapprove of the way the Republicans did this. And his anger translator would be like, these...
Yes.
It's like, there's a reason that's funny, because why doesn't he ever get mad at anything when they're doing this ridiculous, they're shutting down his, even the most basic thing he's trying to get past. Right. He's never mad about anything. I think that mindset is sort of what made people angry about him.
Yeah.
He's too professional.
No, that's right. I think that was his foible. But as far as the Clintons,
it's not really his fault that people reacted to him that way. But
I'm not saying that was any fault. Well, I did say foible. I just think it was an oversight. And maybe his handlers are to be ultimately blamed for that or whatever. I don't know if he had handlers. I'm sure he had people advising him.
Everybody has handlers when you're in the White House.
Almost
the handlers have handlers.
Yeah. But Hillary Clinton, she was not, she had a checkered past, let's put it that way. And when they decided...
Well, so does Biden.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So, So here we are. But there's a lot of things. I think we've hit a lot of the main dynamics here.
So what do we do with these people, I think is the question. How do we respond? Who responds to the reactionaries? Because I think, as someone on the left, I think there's a worry that people on the left are going to be targeted by interacting with these people. Like, these are not safe people to interact with.
No.
For everybody on the left. Like, if you belong to the LGBTQ community, I would encourage you not to ever react or interact with a reactionary.
No, I honestly think that once people, like, it gets to a certain fever pitch, as it has, the only thing that would bring these people back to want to cooperate with others would be a common enemy. And I do not want to see that. I don't want to see another 9/11.
I think you're exactly right, because that's what you see in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Right. So Ukraine had a bit of a reactionary problem until Russia invaded.
Right.
And now they all get along.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. When you have a common enemy, that's about once it gets to that point, they're only going to, truthfully. So, why do evangelicals and Catholics get along so well now? Because you got to
because they have atheists.
Well, abortion.
Yeah.
And Roe v. Wade. That's what eventually, because, those two groups basically hated each other for a long time. But now, there we go. You got a common enemy, the liberal pro-choice people, and we've got to fight them. So, yeah, I forget how that is. It's like, what is it? Hardship or crisis creates strange bedfellows or something like that. I can't remember the exact quote. But yeah, but how, so I'm not saying, let's put it this way. I'm not sure that the people that are already worked up, if we're going to do anything with them, the thing that we can do is to stop the movement from getting any bigger than it already is.
Yeah. I think part of that, there's got to be like a little bit of nuance in the left response to it, because people who are on the pipeline to become reactionary,
right?
What they've never had is some compassion from the liberal side.
Right.
And when I say, like, left and liberal are different,
yes,
they're not the same. But I think you can really stop someone from going down that rabbit hole by just showing some compassion to them.
Absolutely.
But not everybody is going to be safe practicing that.
Right.
So it's up to certain people to do this.
Okay.
And I think, white men, white heterosexual men, that kind of falls on our shoulders.
Well, yeah, yes. And that's another thing. We ran things for so long and tried to keep ourselves in power, that then we got scapegoated for all kinds of other things that were happening. Some of it was our fault, and some of it probably wasn't. But
yeah,
nevertheless, you have to use whatever opportunities of influence you have. But I think you're absolutely right. I think
on the other hand, I also don't think you can negotiate with terrorists. So
no. So yeah, you've got so to our listeners here, I think you have to discern between the people who are grasping at an ideology out of desperation, but what's really driving them is a sense of kind of personal hurt.
Right.
And those people you do have a chance of at least getting through to and say, look, hey, I understand how you feel. I understand why this is upsetting to you. I just am not convinced that this is really going to help. That's not going to solve anything. Like, this is only going to make things worse. I know it might give you a feeling of, it's like, those kind of things that we do. It's like you punch a hole in the wall or something like that. Well, it's just kind of like you're letting off steam, and there might be a little part of you that feels good that you vented your anger, but all you've done is create more damage.
I think there's an equivalent to how we would want like drug addicts to be treated.
Right.
The liberal left side of things says like drug addiction is an illness, and these people deserve our compassion and help to return to a healthy, functioning society. But there's also the other end of that is at some point these people become dangerous. They're willing to do anything.
Yes.
And you can't help somebody who's going to kill you. You can't tolerate intolerance.
Right. Yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, it's I think the emotional read is more important than ideological argument. I think at the end of the day, and this has been out there. I mean, truthfully, I think David Hume was right. I'll just quote Hume. There's different ones that talk about this, but he says that reason is and ought always to be a slave to the passions. And I'm not sure if it ought to be, but I think it is. And so here's the thing. It doesn't do any good to argue with people. You're not going to change people's feelings by presenting ideas. You have to address their feelings in order for them to be open to hearing new ideas. And that's what I've discovered, even as an educator. I learned this very quickly teaching philosophy to college students. When you just start out and you think, oh, they hear these great ideas, they're just going to be so moved by them. But there's a certain number of students that basically they don't even see the point of it. And they're just trying to get in there and get a grade, and they don't see the relevance of it. And so they just kind of let it roll off their backs, and they don't ever think about anything at any kind of deeper level. So basically, after the first year or two, I had to start basically with a unit of, okay, in what sense does philosophy still matter? Or to what extent have we kind of moved past the need for it? Or to what extent does it kind of go too far? And in what sense is it still helpful to people individually or in society? And once you start getting into that and they start seeing where, okay, I can see how this could affect somebody. Well, then they're willing to listen to the ideas. And it's the same thing. If people are hurt or feel trapped or unappreciated or whatever, you've got to kind of break through that first. But if people are so angry, or they're so even brainwashed, if I can say it this way. And what I mean by brainwashed is that they've been conditioned to hate people who don't have their views. And this is why we don't negotiate with terrorists. Once somebody has decided that they hate us, no matter what we're not going to say something that's going to change their mind. If they've been conditioned and programmed, then we have to basically keep them from doing damage. For the people that are still open to being influenced, they're not that far gone. Okay. You might be able to reach them. I mean, this principle is true in a lot of things. It's just like sometimes people think that every person who becomes suicidal could be saved or whatever. But once somebody gets to the point where they've made up their minds that they want to end it all, it's just a matter of time until they get that opportunity and they carry it out. It doesn't matter what you do. There are other people that they're thinking about it, but they may even give you a hint that they're thinking about it because they don't really want to have to. They're hoping that somebody will give them an out. So they're still open to suggestion. And a lot of this has to be kind of discerned on an emotional plane. That's my thinking about practical advice here, Isaac.
Yeah. And I think thinking about philosophy education, I think a philosophy education could be a good, like, stop to some of this stuff.
Absolutely.
Because so many of these people, I even heard one guy who, claims to be a reactionary, openly embraces that identity. He even went all the way back to like Aristotle was evil and corrupting. I was like, wow, okay. So just Plato then.
Well,
the point is, like, even those, like, if you've never studied philosophy, these all seem like esoteric ideas, hard to understand because they've got all this jargon and stuff in them. But, like, they're not that complicated.
Right.
But understanding them is important for understanding how these philosophical ideas are, like, going to war with each other in our culture right now.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's an important point. I do think it's relevant. So maybe we can, help to bridge that gap a little bit. But nevertheless, anything that we still need, any loose ends we need to tie up here?
I don't think so. I would just say to our listeners, I'm guessing that we don't have reactionary listeners. I know most of our audience, I think, and I would not classify any of them in this camp. But I will say to them that the reactionaries always lose.
Yeah.
Every time in history.
Yes.
The tragedy is that some people are going to be on the losing side that didn't have to be.
Yeah. I mean, it's a different, well, it's just as utopian as some of the extreme liberalism. And it's just going in the opposite direction. So speaking of opposite directions,
yes.
Next episode, we will then look at revolutionaries and what makes them tick. That will be an interesting episode and a fun episode to do as well. We've enjoyed our time here with you today. As always, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us at thehappycynics@gmail.com. We hope you have a great day and a great week. And if the world doesn't end before, we'll be back with our next episode on revolutionaries. You take care and make a difference in your part of the world.